Hey, morning. I'm up early this morning. Spirit moved me. Hello. I'm going to talk today about another, surprise, another polarity. And this is specifics and generalities. Specifics and generalities. And in the spirit of how I've been sharing these episodes, some have been specific, and when I say specific, I'm talking about personal things, truths for myself that I have shared, and generalities, which are suggestions that everyone develop, find, locate their own path, their own exploration, because we're in it all alone as far as responsibility for your own inquiry. But rest assured, it's equally so that we're all in it together, because we're all in the process of rediscovering, finding our center, finding our home, resting in the bosom of the universe. And I always had this kind of vision of what heaven would be in the Christian tradition. Heaven to me would be an angel sitting on the, I guess he played like this, sitting on a cloud playing the harp. And I always thought that for eternity, I thought that was pretty limiting and potentially boring. And I was much more content when I felt the unraveling of the perpetual onward and upward path, spiraling as does our Milky Way. And as long as I'm in the cosmic dimensions, I wanted to talk about Lodestar. And Lodestar, when I read it in the paper, it's been in the news recently because one of the person that used this word, which according to an article I read, it's not known to 98% of the population how to use it correctly in its true intent or even any familiarity with the word. But this was in the op-ed in the New York Times, allegedly from a staff member pointing to the chaos in the Trump administration. And one of the words they used was Lodestar. And people are all focused on trying to figure out who wrote this expose. Who's responsible? And fingers pointed to Mike Pence, the vice president, because he's been known to use this word, Lodestar. And Lodestar in astronomy is our polar star, what we call the North Star. Stars that are used for navigational purposes, because to us they appear to remain in the same location. And we know it's not so, that they're definitely moving. But from our perspective, our limited perspective, and usefully so, they tend to stay in one part of the sky. And polar star is the star closest to our axis, our pole, North and South Pole. Polaris is the name that we've given to the star, although we've found out with better microscopes that telescopes, wrong direction, up and in micro and macro are another polarity, much the same. So, telescope that allows us to, a more sophisticated telescope has determined that Polaris is actually a collection of stars. Polaris minor A, Polaris minor B, Polaris major. It's a collection of stars. And upon even closer examination, what we were seeing as a collection of stars is really not so. The collection got smaller. Maybe it's 2 or 3. The other stars that we saw that were close enough were actually not. They were other stars. Not even in the same proximity, but they appeared to be. So who knows what will evolve? But Polaris, interestingly enough, is 433 light years away from us. Now this caught my attention because 33. And in the spirit of today, specifics and generalities, a specific for me, something that I share personally, the only address that I have a memory, the only address in my memory of all the many places I've lived is the place where I spent from 4th grade to 2nd year of high school. And this was 433 West Cedar Street. And why this number has stayed with me. So again, my address that I remember, 433. The light years away that Polaris is coincidentally 433 light years away. Does this have any significance? Well, maybe so, because it has manifested in my life today. So maybe there's something of import, like all these kind of connections, this kind of deja vu, these kind of serendipitous events that seem disparate by nature, might have a cohesiveness. Time has led me to believe that there's a suggestion of cohesiveness, that there aren't any accidents. Everything happens with an intent and purpose. So it's just up for me to put the pieces together. It's kind of fun. It's a useful thing. It's how I can use the tool of the mind to keep busy. Put my monkey mind, as I love this monkey mind, put my monkey mind to a useful pursuit. Connect the dots. That is, after all, what it excels at. So it'd be a fool not to utilize this gift of a mind. So, lodestar. Now, lodestar, navigation purposes, lodestar also suggests guiding principles. Our lodestar is a collection of principles that we've deemed worthy, that we want to follow and attempt to emulate. And now we're in the realms of generalities. Lodestar, Polaris, 433 light years away, by the way, if I failed to mention it earlier, which I know is not so. But just to, in the spirit of continuity, I wanted to come full circle back and repeat myself. So let's look at some specifics. And as an aside, I want to mention that, laughing at myself for my tendency to repeat myself, there was a character in Dick Tracy who I really identified and loved, and he said everything twice. And I really have to try to catch myself to keep myself from repeating, as my brother will happily tell me as I'm sharing the story. Yeah, I heard that before. Patience, brother. You'll get there too. You're only a couple of years behind me. So, tendency to repeat myself and laugh at myself because of the identity with this Dick Tracy. He was called Doublespeak or something. I'd like to look up his name, just for kicks. But anyway, to go back to making this personal specifics, I've mentioned my hierarchy of entities that accompany me on my journey. My journey home. And I want to talk first about the silent witness, because he or she, in the realm of fairness, was with me from earliest memories. I can really remember being in the crib and looking up and feeling the presence. And because we live in square rooms, it was always in one of the corners. Somebody was watching, and I was able to go up and see their view. I could go and share the view of looking down at me as an infant, laying in a crib. Cuckoo, dada. Yeah, but I was so curious. I would even remember pointing, and before I had the words to form it, I was curious about what was that? Who's that? One of my earliest formations of thought was trying to identify. I guess prior to that, I just took it for granted as part of what was. And now as I've gotten older, I've gone back to this same state of acceptance of what is. Anyway, this silent witness never communicated. Not verbally, at least. No words. I couldn't hear talking in my head. But it wasn't long before what I've come to call my guardian angel, a presence in my mind that talked to me, that I had conversations with. And again, without any comparison, it never dawned on me to ask if anyone else experienced this. I was too much in the experience of the reality as I saw it. So this conversation that I had, and I came to see as a guardian angel, distinct from the silent witness, because it seemed to be more personal, because it's like within the confines of my head. Silent witness is up there. Voice of reason, conscience, and this was a constant conversation. And I realized that in the hierarchy, whatever my guardian angel was more evolved than I was. So was able to keep me on the right path. I heeded its counsel. And it steered me right. Never let me down. I always knew what was the correct response to the challenges that life presented me. Of course, it didn't keep me from making errors. And with looking back on it, I chose consciously not to heed. The advice was always sound, especially about relationships, especially about romantic relationships. I seldom made the right choice when it came to romance. Time will tell. Anyway, I'm probably not alone in that. Probably most of you have made similar blunders. And when you look at things, who's to say what seemed like a mistake was probably a life lesson that you needed to learn. So this ongoing conversation all through my adulthood, in fact, up until the time that I met my teacher. And I guess it was in my 59th year probably the end of the 58th year as I look back on it. And I remember when I was taken to this group to listen to their teacher, I had said often and often, over and over again, I have no teacher. I'm not meant to have a teacher. I'm not seeking a teacher. But I guess that old adage, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Anyway, because I was an outsider in terms of language, culture, my teacher was and is deeply Chinese, doesn't speak or understand English. So when I was presented to the group with the possibility of joining, I think there was some skepticism. And I remember meeting with the woman that was at that time designated in the number 2 position. And again, not much English, or in fact, none really. And through an intermediary, I was asked, what is Zen? And I said, Zen is the quickest way home. And I'd never thought this or planned this. This was just the voice from within speaking out. Zen is the quickest way home. And that to this day, even after many, many years of study, it remains my favorite explanation of what Zen is. And when it was translated to her, she jumped up like shot out of a cannon and disappeared out of the room. And I thought, And in a moment, the teacher, soon to be my teacher, came into the room. And that was the beginning of our relationship. So I guess I'd passed the litmus test somehow. And not many months after, I had a heart attack. I had just turned 59. Heart attack. And a couple of years later, it got bad enough that I had to have open heart surgery. And my teacher came to see me several times in the hospital previous to my surgery. And 1 or 2 nights before the surgery, and this is the point of the story, 1 or 2 nights before the surgery, he told me that there was an entity, a soul, from relationships maybe 1,500 years ago. This entity had attached itself to me. And the history of that, I don't think is important, and I don't really spend much time wondering. And he asked me for permission to release this entity, that the time of usefulness for both of us had come to pass. And of course, at this point, I deeply trusted him. And I said, sure. And he did. Whatever it is that he did. But the thing that stuck out to me, that my guardian angel, the entity inside my head that I communicated with on an ongoing, continual basis, was no longer there. It was kind of amazing. It felt lonely at first, but it didn't take me long to understand that we had both outlived our relationship. And as I really examined, because it was so intrinsic, such a part of me that I couldn't separate. Inside my head, I couldn't separate it from me. Where I began, where I ended, where it began. But after the entity was released to continue on their work, I came to understand that it was a female energy. Someone that had loved me very much. Someone, in most ways, more advanced than me. But someone who had unselfishly postponed her own journey in her need to be attached to me. So the immediate reaction to this was feeling much lighter. Like, I always say that most of us carry 100-pound bag of shit, for lack of a better word, shit that we cling to. And we're carrying this as we're walking up the mountain. And at a certain point in my journey, I decided to put this bag down, to let the shit go. Very liberating, but also put a spring in my step. Lighten the load, if you get my meaning, yes, literally. And this was much earlier in my life. I think the time that I was absorbing my divorce, around 33, imagine that I'm 33, when I let this bag down. But here again, at almost 60, my guardian angel, as I categorized it, was gone. And there again was a tremendous lightning. But this was of the spirit. The sack that I was carrying was physical. Letting this entity go with the help of my teacher, the guidance of my teacher, was a load off. Mentally versus the physical, emotionally, spiritually. I guess essentially it meant that I had grown up. I could stand on my own 2 feet. So since this happened 5, almost 6 years ago, I haven't looked back too much, because this is something that I don't do. I practice not doing it, in fact. But it doesn't mean that I'm not grateful for all the companionship, for all the guidance. Because, we need, if you hit the tennis ball against the wall and it comes back, we all need to bounce something off of someone. And for whatever reason, I never found anybody in the, I say, real world, but another being that I could feel comfortable bouncing things with, hitting the ball, having it come back. So this entity that apparently was attached to me served that purpose. And I am eternally grateful. And I wish this entity, this spirit, nothing but the best on her journey. So you see, in the spirit of my polarity, my infatuation with polarity, my obsession with the polarity. Before I was obsessed on the difference between silent and silence and what clarity was. But when I look back at the names of all my episodes, I can't help but notice that this reoccurring theme of polarities. So today's specifics and generalities, in that spirit was today's sharing. I used specifics, talking about details in my own personal life, and I use them as generalities. I expect no one to have the same experiences as I've had. We each have our own experiences. So my specifics are intended in the spirit of generality, that you can take or leave what is useful as you put together your own puzzle, as you fit the pieces into your journey. That's the point of my using specifics, my using personal examples of my life, with no intention of suggesting that you follow any of the things I'm suggesting. Specifics become generalities, suggesting that we are all in the same boat together.